Over the last week, The Telegraph has been slowly releasing new information about the BBC and their biases from their internal BBC sources, and more recently, they released that entire full report exposing countless different examples of the BBC's bias, in particular in favour of the left-wing media and political establishment. Now, I went through all the anti-Trump bias exposed on this report a few days ago, but now the story has exploded. The BBC's CEO and Director General both have been forced to resign. Trump is commenting on the situation publicly, calling them fake news, and it's an absolute embarrassment for the BBC as they've been exposed as a left-wing state-run propaganda media enterprise. This is also a massive embarrassment for Labour, and Starmer in particular, as they are steadfast supporters and defenders of the BBC and of this institutional left-wing bias. So in this video, I'll explain exactly what's going on with this scandal, what happened, and we're going to take a look through the bias that the BBC showed against Trump that's now been exposed by The Telegraph, and then break down where the scandal is at so far and what we can expect to happen next. So let's start off just by actually taking a look at what the initial accusations from The Telegraph are with this short video here.
BBC claims to be the pinnacle of impartial reporting, but what if there was an internal dossier that revealed that wasn't the case? The Telegraph has seen a letter that reveals one of the BBC's own independent advisors repeatedly warned that the broadcaster had serious and systemic problems. A week before the US election, BBC Panorama released a documentary called Trump: A Second Chance, and in it, they played the following clip.
We're going to walk down to the Capitol, and I'll be there with you, and we fight. We fight like hell.
But Trump didn't in fact say this at all. The BBC spliced together two clips that took place 54 minutes apart. So let's go through it again.
We're going to walk down to the Capitol, and I'll be there with you.
Now, see there, between Capitol and, that's a cut. Here's what Trump actually said.
We're going to walk down to the Capitol, and we're going to cheer on our brave senators and congressmen and women.
That really is an egregious edit as well. It's entirely changing the nature and the content of what he's saying. And the BBC's response to this, their justification, and the left-wing response and justification on things like X.com and other places online has basically been, oh, it's normal process to cut down a speech rather than show 55 minutes of what he's saying. But that wasn't showing a concentrated, shortened speech. That was actively changing the words in the sentence that Trump used. And this one here, the Trump bias story, is certainly the biggest, most important story that's driven the most media attention out of all of the biases that have been exposed from the BBC.
It wasn't until nearly an hour later that he then said the second part of the BBC's version.
We're going to walk down to the Capitol, and we fight. We fight like hell.
Now, it's true that a lot of people will still feel Trump's claims that in 2021 the election was stolen were entirely inappropriate and unbecoming of a figure in politics. But irrespective of your personal views on Trump, the question remains, how is a national broadcaster, funded by taxpayers on the premise that it will provide impartial reporting, allowed to splice together content in a way that one of its own advisors said materially misled viewers? And we're not even done yet. The footage Panorama showed of the Proud Boys marching towards the Capitol building, seemingly spurred on by Trump's rousing speech, well, that was actually taken before he'd even addressed the crowd. In fact, the BBC themselves later published a report at odds with Panorama's own timeline.
Hilarious.
These are the Proud Boys, another right-wing militia, seen a little earlier that morning.
Howdy, your boy!
Donald Trump will not appear for another hour or so, but they're already heading towards the Capitol.
They're even time-stamped the footage to show that the march began at 10:58 a.m., well before Trump's midday speech. The true chronology raises serious questions about the way in which the BBC decided to portray the events of January the 6th. In fact, the memo highlights that shortly after the first extract of Trump's speech, the now president actually said,
I know that everyone here will soon be marching over to the Capitol building to peacefully and patriotically make your voices heard.
The BBC advisor who wrote this report claimed Panorama's editing was completely misleading, as Trump did not explicitly exhort supporters to go down and fight at Capitol Hill. They even pointed out that this was a key reason why he didn't face federal charges for incitement to riot. The BBC's Editorial Guidelines and Standards Committee member who wrote this memo raised all of these concerns, among others, with the BBC executive, but they were dismissed, ignored, and even accused of cherry-picking. But this isn't the first time we've seen the BBC criticised for selective editing.
And it goes on, and there's genuinely hundreds and hundreds of examples. In particular, there's egregious bias shown with the Israel-Palestine and Gaza conflict as well. But in essence, this entire story blew up, and we ended up with yesterday this news coming in here: Davy and Turness resignation statements in full. That's the BBC Director General Tim Davy and the CEO of BBC News Deborah Turness. They've both been forced to resign or fired. We don't really know from this, and so I'm just going to go through quickly their statements and point out some more ridiculous statements and just examples of how lacking in responsibility and candor the BBC really is. So this is the Director General, Tim Davy. I wanted to let you all know that I've decided to leave the BBC after 20 years. This is entirely my decision. I really don't think it is, mate. I think you've been forced out. He then goes on to say that he's very happy and they've done a good job. In these increasingly polarised times, the BBC is of unique value and speaks to the very best of us. It makes the UK a special place, overwhelmingly kind, tolerant and curious. No, it doesn't. It lies and commits, fraud on an international basis, trying to manipulate the results of foreign elections and different people's democracies. The BBC is not perfect. We must also remain open, transparent, and accountable. That's distinctly what you were not, and that's why you're being forced to resign. While not being the only reason, the current debate around BBC News has contributed to my decision. No, I think this is 99% your decision. Overall, the BBC is delivering well. Again, categorically false. But there have been some mistakes made, and I have to take ultimate responsibility. These weren't mistakes. These were conscious decisions. The facts that they were mistakes, that was drawn to the board's attention on multiple occasions, and every single time they refused to act, they refused to admit any wrongdoing. That's not a mistake. That is political bias ingrained within your organisation. Our organisation is a critical ingredient of a healthy society, as well as a thriving creative sector. No, it isn't a healthy environment or a critical ingredient of a healthy society, because you are contributing to the discourse within our countries by propagating and spreading fake news. Despite a hugely competitive market, we're proud that the BBC remains the most trusted news brand globally. It is no longer trusted because of your failings as Director General. He then goes on to say, you will ask, why now this moment? Why am I resigning now? And he goes on to say nothing about this. The new timing allows a new Director General to help shape the next charter. I believe we're in a strong position to deliver growth. This entire statement was essentially shirking responsibility, refusing to even admit that the reason he's resigning is because he's been exposed as a left-wing shill who has monopolised and seized control of what is supposed to be an unbiased news organisation and used it to push his personal political agenda. Then we have the CEO of BBC News, Deborah Turness. Again, we have basically the exact same situation here, except at least she does acknowledge the fact that she's resigning because of her failings with regards to this scandal. I've never been more proud of the work you do every day speaking to the BBC. You really are the best of the best. I disagree there. I have taken the difficult decision that I will no longer be my role to lead you in the collective vision that we all have to pursue the truth with no agenda. Incredible again, isn't it? You are resigning because you actively did not pursue the truth. You allowed your agenda to get in the way of facts, and you tried to manipulate public opinion against a president of another country. That is not pursuing the truth with no agenda. The ongoing controversy around the panorama on President Trump has reached a stage where it's causing damage to the BBC. Again, she's blaming the controversy around this, not her actions. She's acting like it is our fault for being angry about her bias and her treasonous, traitorous decision to move against the British public, to lie to them and to manipulate them. She's acting like we're the ones at fault for being upset and angry about this, and that's causing damage to the BBC. And so she's going to step in and stand down to protect the BBC. As the CEO, the buck stops with me. I took the decision to offer my resignation last night. Except the buck didn't stop with you, because this scandal started more than a week ago. It's just now that Donald Trump and every politician in the UK is jumping on top, calling for your resignation, you finally realise that your position is untenable. You aren't actually being brave or sincere or trying to protect the BBC here. You've just been forced out. In public life, leaders need to be fully accountable, which is why I'm stepping down. Great again in theory, except you were not fully accountable for the years you were in power pushing this left-wing agenda. Whilst mistakes have been made, I want to be absolutely clear. Recent allegations that BBC News is institutionally biased are wrong. If that were wrong, you would not be forced to resign right now. Anyway, she goes on to continue to say that the BBC is an incredible organisation, that it's the best of Britain, and all this other such nonsense, which has just been proved, categorically wrong. Thankfully, though, she does at least recognise that this entire scandal is the reason she's being kicked out, unlike the Director General, who is for some reason trying to pretend that this is some personal decision and nothing to do with the massive scandal, and the rejection of him as a person. So let's take a look at some politicians' reactions to this scandal, shall we? We have here Lisa Nandy. She's the Labour Culture Secretary, so the minister who's basically in charge of the BBC and other cultural things. I want to thank Tim Davie for his service to public broadcasting. He's led the BBC through a significant period of change and helped them rise to the challenge. The BBC is one of our most important national institutions. Every day it tells the story of who we are. Now more than ever, the need for trusted news and high quality programming is essential. As a government, we will support the board as it manages the transition. She said nothing about the institutional left-wing bias of the BBC that's just been exposed. Instead, she's larping around pretending that this statement of support for a now disgraced Director General is going to be sufficient. What about another left-wing nonsense man? We have Ed Davey, of course, the most unserious man in British politics. He said, "The BBC isn't perfect, but it remains one of the few institutions standing between our British values and a populist Trump-style takeover of our politics." That's incredible. He's taken a story about the BBC lying and manipulating footage to put words in Trump's mouth that he never said, and he's saying that the BBC is the only defense against a Trump-style uprising. This is absolutely ludicrous. The BBC is the very reason we're having a rise in the right, in the rise of the Reform Party, because of their institutional left-wing bias, which has manipulated and essentially captured British institutions in our country over the last 10 or 20 years. He then says that the resignations here must be an opportunity for the BBC to turn a new leaf. Well, why would they need to turn a new leaf if they're the reason that we're avoiding a Trump-style takeover of our politics? Obviously, we wouldn't need to turn a new leaf unless there have been serious failings. As a public service broadcaster, the BBC's role is vital in ensuring our democracy is based on facts, scrutiny and accountability. Again, the BBC is in chaos and scandal right now because it has not been based on facts. It has shirked accountability and refused to acknowledge any of the scrutiny that came upon it from its internal board. How is that at all aligned with what you're saying? Absolutely ludicrous. Let's have a look at what a serious politician has to say. Nigel Farage. Davey and Turness must be the start of wholesale change. The government needs to appoint somebody with a record of coming in and turning companies and their cultures around, absolutely. Preferably, it will be someone coming in from the private sector who has run a forward-facing business and understands PR. This is the BBC's last chance. If they don't get this right, there will be vast numbers of people refusing to pay the licence fee. I believe Boris Johnson actually came out and said that he's considering stopping paying his licence fee. I'll tell you something, I haven't paid the licence fee in years, nor fucking will I. Sorry for the swearing. Let's move on now to Trump, because this is one of the reasons this scandal gained so much traction is because Trump himself was speaking about it and speaking out about it. The top people in the BBC, I have to say, Truth Social is a horrid website. The software, the app is absolutely awful. The amount of horrid ads you see on it, awful. Anyway, the top people in the BBC, including Davey, the boss, are quitting or getting fired because they were caught doctoring my very good, perfect speech on the January 6th. I really do find it hilarious how he writes exactly how he speaks. Thank you to The Telegraph for exposing these corrupt journalists. Again, brackets journalists, that's funny. These are very dishonest people who try to step on the scales of a presidential election. On top of everything else, they are from a foreign country, one that many consider our number one ally. What a terrible thing for democracy. Now, the left will, really talk down about this statement, but everything Trump has said here is accurate and faithful and true. In reality, he is not the criminal, the guilty party here. He's the one being attacked by a supposedly unbiased source. Final Final one here then, we have, or second final one, we have Caroline Levitt, the White House press secretary, shot. Trump goes to war with fake news BBC, and the chaser, Tim Davie resigns as BBC Director General over Trump documentary edit. And then the final thing we'll look at from a politician's reaction here is Kemi Badenoch, which I do think is relevant. I know the Tories are dead. I hope they do really die as a political force, but let's at least give her a chance, shall we? It's right that Tim Davie and Deborah Turness have finally taken responsibility and resigned from the BBC, sure. But let's be honest, this has been a catalogue of serious failures that runs far deeper. The Prescott report exposed institutional bias that cannot be swept away with 2 resignations. Strong action must be taken on all the issues it raised. The culture at the BBC has not yet changed. BBC Arabic, this was one of the other big aspects of the scandal. It was essentially cooperating and platforming literal terrorists on hundreds of occasions over the course of months and months. It needs to be brought under urgent control. The BBC's US and Middle East coverage needs a full overhaul, and on basic matters of biology, the corporation can no longer allow its output to be shaped by a cabal of ideological activists. The new leadership must now deliver genuine reform of the culture of the BBC, top to bottom, because it should not expect the public to keep funding it through a compulsory licence fee unless it can finally demonstrate true impartiality. Strong words there, but we cannot forget this is a Tory politician who was in power when this BBC CEO of News was appointed. She was in power when the Panorama documentary was released. She allowed the BBC to remain biased. She refused to try and fix it. And she is only now jumping on the bandwagon while she's in opposition. She and the entire Conservative Party cannot be trusted. Every single word they say is a lie, and it's proven a lie by their failure to act with these words that they're so happy spouting out nowadays that they're in opposition. And it's all proven by the fact that they were in power for 14 years and they destroyed our country. I implore you, I know we have a lot of British people watching this new channel. I'm hoping to grow it even larger, and I have quite an older demographic. I'm 27, but I think the average age of the person who watches me is about 50 or 55. That is the Tory heartland. I implore you, reject the Conservative Party. They have betrayed our country over the last 14 years. Kemi Badenoch is one of those treasonous betrayers. We cannot trust her. We cannot give her or anyone in the Conservative Party another chance. They have destroyed our country. We can't do it again. Okay, finally, I wanted to just go through another article that the Telegraph have released in light of this whole scandal, because frankly, the Telegraph put it far better than I ever could. I think their journalism really, really is top notch, and I think we really should be incredibly, incredibly grateful to them for exposing this. So here's the article: how the Telegraph's revelations have made Tim Davie's position untenable. We're just going to go through a few things that I've pulled out from this. From the moment the Telegraph revealed Panorama's fakery of a Donald Trump speech, his position as Director General was untenable. Not only had he allowed a culture to develop that meant his staff believed they could get away with this sort of thing, but he had also been told about it months ago and did nothing. That's the real, evidence of criminality here, in my opinion, right? It wasn't that this has only just been exposed. They have known about this. The BBC have known about this bias and this fraudulent, journalism that they're putting out for months, and they've refused to act. Turness, the chief executive of BBC News, actually tried to justify the doctoring of the Trump speech, telling a meeting of the Broadcasters Standards Committee that it was fine because it broadly reflected the truth about Trump's actions. She too has now gone, thank God. What of the other parties? Jonathan Munro, the global head of news content, told the same Standards Committee meeting that there was no attempt to mislead the audience over Trump. This man needs to be fired. He needs to be banned from ever holding any public office or any role paid by a taxpayer. He needs to have his pension revoked and stripped and returned to the taxpayer because he hijacked a supposedly non-political media outlet that we are forced at point of violence to pay through our taxes, and he hijacked it for his own political agenda. He needs to be punished severely, just like the others. They need to be banned from ever holding public office, ever working under taxpayer-funded roles, and having all their pensions and all their benefits they've accrued up over the years stripped from them as well. He claimed that it's normal practice to edit speeches. The idea that it might be normal practice at the BBC to make people say things they didn't is a chilling thought indeed. Samir Shah, the BBC chairman, does not emerge blameless either. He was in the same exact meeting where all of this was brought up by Michael Prescott, the independent advisor on whose whistleblowing letter our reporting has been based. Mr. Shah seems to have failed to grasp the significance of Panorama's Trumpgate, and when Mr. Prescott wrote to him personally to implore him to act, he didn't even bother to reply. And what of the Panorama team who edited the Trump speech in the first place? We await developments on whether any of them will be held to account. We know they will not. The editors, the journalists who worked on that specific documentary also all need to be fired and banned from any kind of public role. Ironically, Mr. Davey was lauded as the safe pair of hands who had sought out the BBC's ongoing problems over impartiality when he was given the job in 2020. Do not forget that. 2020, he came into power under the Conservatives. They put him there. They are complicit in this failure as well. A former Conservative Party activist, he set out his stall by rewriting. He is actually part of the Conservative Party, and yet here the Conservatives are saying that, oh no, we can't accept this and it's unacceptable. We must reject this biased BBC organisation. He set out his stall by rewriting the guidelines for BBC staff, telling them that they should avoid expressing personal views on controversial subjects on their own social media accounts, stressing the founding principle of impartiality, and telling makers of satirical programmes to find a better balance rather than simply attacking the Tories. Over the last 5 years, he has failed to enforce his own rules. Lineker was allowed to do as he pleased. BBC Arabic became what Dame Priti Patel has described the Hamas broadcasting service, and the LGBT desk refused to cover any stories that challenge their narrow racial gender ideology. It would be tempting to argue that the BBC has become ungovernable, and if it has, Mr. Davey takes a large share of the blame for that. But those who care about the BBC will hope that a new strong leader will crack down relentlessly on bias and make it clear that jobs are on the line. Their first test will come with a decision over Mr. Munro's future. He, of course, should be fired. As the Telegraph's revelations built day after day over the past week, Mr. Davey and others were damned by their own inaction. Again, they did not do the big thing and take responsibility before this became a scandal. They waited until the pressure was too great. Rather than accepting there was a problem, they waited to see what sort of response there was to the Telegraph revelations, hoping they would be ignored by others, most notably by the BBC themselves, and that the whole thing would blow over. The silence from those at the top was total. Left-wing newspapers like The Guardian were briefed on a supposed right-wing conspiracy to bring the corporation down. Nick Robinson, the BBC Today programme presenter, took to social media to amplify that view rather than asking how his colleagues had been allowed to doctor a speech by the future US president. So other people within the BBC still defending their heinous actions and trying to put the blame on us instead for being annoyed at their bias. Ms. Turness wrote to staff on Friday about the difficult week the BBC endured because of the reporting in some quarters, in other words, the Telegraph, which for many at the BBC was the real villain of the piece. Don't forget, they do not think they did anything wrong. They think that we are doing things wrong for exposing them and for placing pressure upon them for their crimes. Then Mr. Davey and others realised time was running out. First came the news that Parliament's Culture, Media and Sports Select Committee had called him to give evidence. The committee also wrote to Mr. Shah demanding answers. It was inevitable that Davey would himself be called to give evidence eventually, and that he would simply have no good answers to the questions of why he had done nothing about the Panorama scandal, why BBC Arabic had got out of control, and so many other questions besides. Clinging on to his job seemed like delaying the inevitable. As the week wore on, complacency turned to panic within the BBC. Rather than our story dying, it gathered pace. Both in the UK and internationally, it was making the news in America, Israel, Australia, and elsewhere. The BBC's all-important reputation as a provider of impartial news was in danger of being lost for good. It became clear that unless there were major changes, it might be too late to get that hard-won reputation back. Importantly, the government is about to enter negotiations over the renewal of the BBC's Royal Charter, which expires in 2027, and the Culture Secretary has made it clear that she was unimpressed by what she was reading in the Telegraph. So there we are. The scandal seems to have mostly stopped here, but there is a really, really big, deep, overarching problem here. Labour love the BBC. They love the coverage that they are given by and large, that the left-wing media establishment promotes. It aligns perfectly with Labour's core values of the destruction of the United Kingdom, of mass immigration being a good thing, of the erasure of English culture. And yet, the people are standing up and saying, we are not happy with this, we will not accept it. We need to keep applying pressure to these biased left-wing organisations at every single opportunity. One of the best ways of doing this, in my opinion, is through new media. people on YouTube just like myself, people on X or Facebook or whatever else it might be, bypassing the traditional legacy media's monopoly on information and getting our word out there as much as possible. If you want to help me in my mission to try and change British politics, I don't make any money from this channel. Yeah, I hope I will in the future a bit, but I'm going to be making a video every single day for the entirety of this month. And if it goes well, I'll keep doing it past that as well. I am doing this because I am deeply, deeply saddened by the state of my country every single day I wake up, and I want to see a change. So I'm taking extra time out of my day every single day to put together these videos, to plan out what I'm going to be talking about and what I'm going to say, and to show you different pieces of evidence, and then speaking it all through, recording, and then editing, and getting it all posted and uploaded. Probably coming out to 20, 30 hours a week. If you want to help me out, share this video. Send it to someone you know, a friend, a family, a co-worker who needs to learn about the institutional bias of the BBC, who maybe doesn't believe about the left-wing bias of the legacy media, and we can help change and improve the country for the better. Of course, other than that, leave comments down below if you want me to cover a particular topic, or if you want to tell me something, or tell me I'm an idiot or a right-wing shill or whatever it may be, I don't care. Or give me a subscribe again if you want to help out the channel. Cheers. Bill Gates just admitted that the climate change green agenda is basically a scam, that the world isn't going to end despite what he's been telling us for years at this point, and that we're not all going to die from climate change. And even more than that, he's admitted that actually the climate change agenda is costing us all money, that it isn't making